Like charts, maps can be a common feature in apps. Unlike charts, Android and iOS both provide native libraries to display maps. Additionally, it may not be necessary to display a map inside the app. You could launch the built-in map app on the actual device. Typically, native maps look better. They are vector-based and not tile-based. They're implemented using native code and not JavaScript. They use platform-specific look and feel. Apple will use Apple Maps and Android will use Google Maps. One issue with native maps is that because it doesn't integrate with HTML, it is somewhat of a hack to display the native map, which involves making the component above it transparent, which can cause some issues in certain scenarios. The most common JavaScript Maps SDK is Google Maps, but there are others, Microsoft, Here Maps, Mapbox, and OpenStreetMaps. However, in this course, we'll be using the Google Maps due to its popularity. Unlike chart.js, Google Maps doesn't require installation of anything via NPM. Instead, Google Maps JavaScript API is simply included in the HTML like you would a normal JavaScript API. Remember that Ionic and Angular create one-page apps. As a result, you only need to include the JavaScript in your index.html file. And you would add a reference to the Google Maps API in the head section of that document. Note that you will also need to include your API key in the URL. So most web APIs require an API key. The developer registers for the API key by providing their contact details. The API key is then sent with every web request. If the developer abuses the web API, then they can be traced via their API key and their contact details. Therefore, Google requires anyone using their Maps API to have an API key. Registering for an API key is free and relatively simple. So go to the Google Developer Console, just Google that and you will find the Google Developer Console. You will have to sign in with a Google account. If this is your first time here, you will be asked in the dashboard to create a project. You have a limited number of projects that you can create. Give your project a name, and the organization can be left as no organization. The project ID cannot be changed once it has been created. Once you have created your project, you can then enable the API, and once you have created your project, you can then enable API Once you have created your project, you can then enable APIs and services for that project. So go to the library section to see a list of available APIs and services. The API we are looking for is the Maps JavaScript API. Select that option, and then on the page that results, press on the Enable button. This now adds the JavaScript Maps API to the project. Next, in the tab menu at the top that shows metrics, quotas, and credentials, click on the credentials, select the Create Credentials button, and in the drop-down menu, select the API key option. Your API key will be created. Take a copy of this as you will need it for your app. We will place the map in a page component, for example, the home page. To enable the map, we are going to create a div tag with attributes that allow us to easily reference it from our component class. So here we'll create our div tag with a template reference variable of map, and we'll also give it a HTML ID attribute of ID so that we can apply some CSS to it as well. So just remembering that the hash map creates a template reference variable, which just makes it easier for us to reference the element from within our component class. In the component TypeScript file, we need to declare the Google class. Declare is used to tell TypeScript that the variable has been created elsewhere. If you use declare, nothing is added to the JavaScript that is generated. It is simply a hint to the compiler. This is because we have to include the JavaScript file in the index.html file and not import it into our individual component class. The class properties required for the map is very similar to the chart.js setup. So we need a property to refer to the HTML div element and a property that is going to hold the map object. As a result, we will define the following properties. So we'll have our view child of map, which is referencing the template variable we created on our div tag, and map will be a reference to the actual object, which is our map. In our map.page.ts file, we will have the following. We have a reference to our Google object through our declare let Google. We have a reference to the map div element through our view child. And we also have a variable to use to store our map as our map any. Just like chart.js, we will create the map in our ng on init. First, we create a location, so defining a lat and long using the google.maps.latlong method. Then we create some map options. So these options will be telling us where we want to center our map, how far we want to zoom in onto the map, and what type of map we're going to have. Finally, we create an instance of our new Google map. We will require some styling to set the dimensions of the div container, and we can target our ID selector to do that. Finally, your map is in an ion content block. If it has padding on it, then remove it so that our map can go full width or full screen. Google charges for map usage on a pay-as-you-go basis. If you haven't entered any billing details, then you won't be charged, and you may see a darkened view of your map with a watermark showing it for development only. You will get an error if you have exceeded the quota for your console. This is okay. However, you may get an error that you have exceeded the quota in the console and get this negative map image. You may wish to add markers to a map to indicate locations. When you create a marker, you also indicate which map it is for. So it will automatically be added to the map. This code can go in our ng on init. So here we create our new Google Maps marker. We define the map that it was going to be attached to. We can define a type of animation, in this case a drop animation, and we then give it a position, and then we define its position as being the center of the current map. For this example, we have set them the map as the one we already have and have picked a drop animation for the marker. We have then set the position of the marker to be the center of the map. You may want to respond to a marker being tapped on. So Google provides an information window function that can be displayed when a marker is tapped. So the following associates an event listener with the marker and displays an information window. The information window content can be HTML. In the example, we hard-coded the latitude and longitude of the map's center. However, you might want to display the map for the user's current location. Android and iOS provide native functions to get the user's location. HTML5 also provides a Navigator API, which allows the user's location to be accessed. If your device supports the Navigator API, then the Navigator object should be defined and available. You should test whether it is available before accessing it. So do a test of if navigator.geolocation. If it works, we'll be able to get our location. If not, then we need to give some error reporting back. Getting the current location is an asynchronous API because it takes time for the device to determine the current location. As a result, you need to pass a callback function to be able to process the result. You may wish to center the map with the current position. The Google Maps map coordinates use different property names than the HTML The Google Maps map coordinates use different property names than the HTML5 Navigator API. So we will need to create a new position object with the Google Maps property names. Google Maps is looking for a position object with a lat and long properties. The following code checks if geolocation is available. It then gets the current location and then centers the map to that location. In addition to the latitude and longitude properties, the coord object returned by the getCurrentPosition function also has the following properties of accuracy, the altitude, as in meters above sea level, the altitude accuracy, a heading or a compass direction, and a speed in meters per second. If you have an app that requires continuous geolocation updates, for example, if you may have an app that requires continuous geolocation updates, for example, if tracking a person's movement. Instead of calling getCurrentPosition, you can call watchPosition. Your function will be called whenever a user's position moves by a certain amount. The watchPosition function can be cancelled by calling a clearWatch function. In Chrome and Safari, geolocation will only be provided if the connection is using HTTPS. Ionic Serve does not support a HTTPS connection. It will work in Firefox, which doesn't require a HTTPS connection. Ionic are working on supporting HTTPS in Ionic Serve in future versions of the CLI tool. So for now, to test this, you should use Firefox. Let's have a look at using the Google Maps API. So the first point we start off with here will be in our index.html, and this is where we will include our script tag that we have taken from the Google Maps website, and noting that we have added in our own API key within this particular script tag. From there, if we have a look at the HTML needed for this, all we're needing is a div tag with a template variable on there that I'm using called map. And I'm also adding an ID, it's a standard HTML ID attribute called map as well. And I'll use this ID map to target in our style sheets to be able to set the height and width of our map as we see it being displayed over the side here. So let's then have a look at the class file that does all the work for this. So once again, similar to how we did our chart.js, we need to include or import our viewChild module so that we can use it to get a reference to the element that we want to be using on screen. So here we have our viewChild of map, and internally now here that will be a variable called map element. We'll also, similar to chart.js, is create another variable called map, which will hold a reference to the map that is created in case we want to make changes to it further on. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is actually let's create a location, so something that is of a latitude and longitude. Actually, before that, we've got one thing that I did miss up the top here, and that is this declare let Google. So declare allows us to redefine a variable, a JavaScript variable that's from somewhere else. So within this script file here that we've added in is an object called Google. So we are redeclaring that Google variable here so that we can then reference all of the methods of this Google API. So that's the reason why we call that Google, so that we can then reference all these other Googles in here. So first of all, then we're going to grab a location and we'll set some map options. So here we're centering our map based on the lat and long that we have grabbed from here. So this lat and long will pick up pretty much over the top of the building you're in at the moment. We have a zoom level. So zoom level of 0 is fully zoomed out. For every level, every integer number that you come in, basically doubles the resolution that we see. And the map type ID is we're looking for a road map as opposed to satellite or hybrids. So once we have our location and we have our options, we can then create our map. So this .map is referencing our map variable that we created at the top, and we're going to create a new Google map. It needs to know what element it's going to be on. So this is the map element that we got here from our viewChild, which is the div tag. And we need to pass it its options so that it's going to be centered on a particular lat long with a particular zoom level showing the standard roadmap. If we wanted to add a marker, then here's an example of adding a marker. So we're creating a new variable called marker, which is going to be a Google.maps marker. We tell it what map that marker is for. You may have multiple Google Maps on the page. So here we pass in our reference to this .map, which is the reference of the map we created. We define what sort of animation, so this will give it the effect when it loads of the pin dropping onto the page, and we're telling it a position of where we want that to be. In this case, we're just saying center it on the current map. It's fine. If we click on one of those markers, we have the ability to bring up an event window. So here we can define a new info window and pass it some content. That content can be HTML. Then we create an event listener, which is going to be a click on that particular marker, and that will open the info window for that marker. And lastly, the functionality on this page is to use the geolocation that's built into HTML5. So we can use the navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition. So that will pass back this position.coords.latitude and longitude. Google Maps requires a position object which is just lat and long. So here we're basically doing a conversion to take the numbers that we're going to get from HTML5 to put them in a format that is appropriate for Google, and that will allow us to set the center position of the map to be whatever our current position is. If we're unable to get that position, either the person, you're on a browser that doesn't support geolocation, or the person does not give permissions, then we'll throw up an alert saying geolocation not supported. So if we have a look at this running over here, if I reload the page, we see the pin drop in. And at the moment, because we're using a development version and I don't have a paid up account with Google for this, I have a limited number of displays of the page before I run out of my quota, which I have. So what you'll see is this darkened version with this development purposes only watermark written over the top of it. I had been into this page before and had blocked the location marker for the geolocation. I've just cleared that value. So if I reload this again, we should now get up the dialog box here, which is asking for, do you want to let me see your location? And you can allow or block that. If I allowed that, it would come up and center the map over my current location. Okay, so that's the basics of using Google Maps. Relatively simple, very similar in way that we did the chart.js, that we need to define what element this is going to work on and pass it an object which has different options on it to tell it how to render.